today's World Insight, Chinese President Xi Jinping, the first speaker in setting the 2021 Davos Agenda, to the World Economic Forum helped get China and the U.S. back on a cooperative track.
We have to re-energize the World Trade Organization, and this can only be done if China and the U.S. also find a common path and we can break some of the impulses that we have seen so far.
And the way forward for China and the U.S., a departure from the past 4 years, or more of the same. Sharp insights from the president of the National Committee on U.S. China Relations.
I think a lot that the Biden folks will reverse a lot of the policies which have damaged U.S. China relations.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight. Chinese President Xi Jinping will speak at the Davos Agenda 2021 on January the 25th. With a yet-to-be-tamed global pandemic, the world is eager to know how the Chinese president plans to lead the world's most populous country in the coming years. President Xi's upcoming speech comes on the 4th anniversary of the Davos 2017 speech, calling for multilateralism and collaboration. But it will depend on whether major powers like the U.S. are willing to heed the call of collaboration. Borge Brende, the president of the World Economic Forum, hopes Biden administration in the U.S. will be receptive to solutions contributed by China and others to fix global challenges like the pandemic and climate change. In an exclusive interview, President Brende told me he is most eager to see how big a global role China will take on pressing issues in post-pandemic world. Let's listen in. Borge, what a pleasure to see you.
Likewise, so good to see you, even if it's from a far distance.
We understand that the Agenda Summit of the World Economic Forum is approaching soon, while at the same time we see the change of leadership in some major economies. What do you make of the recent ups and downs of geopolitics, and what does it say with the change of leadership to you?
So firstly, I do hope that 2021 will be a much better year than 2020, also when it comes to global cooperation. And as you refer to, the cooperation between China and the U.S. as G2, the two largest economies in the world, close to 50% of the global GDP, is crucial. So I do hope that in the year to come that President Xi Jinping and also President Joe Biden will find a good way to work together, because we know if you're going to address the three C's, COVID, climate change, and cooperation, we need the world to come together. And COVID anywhere is COVID everywhere, and climate change doesn't know any kind of borders. So we are all in the same boat, and this is also what President Xi Jinping alluded to in Davos in 2017. We do need to work together and also to strengthen the multilateral cooperation.
Talking about the 2017, when Chinese President Xi Jinping was delivering a speech and certainly won a lot of reaction from the international community, he talked about two things. One is multilateral approach, the other is international cooperation. Two keywords you all mentioned in your earlier answer. But the question is how, under the new circumstances, isn't it, Brende? Mr. Brende.
So I think we have no alternative to work together. If we're going to see an early recovery from this crisis, we also have to continue to trade with each other. So we have to re-energize the World Trade Organization. And this can only be done if China and the U.S. also find a common path, and we can break some of the impulses that we have seen so far. Also, I think the multilateral system also has to go through reforms. It was built after the Second World War. A lot has happened. There are a lot of emerging economies. There are new challenges that we are faced with that don't know any kind of borders. So the multilateral system has to be strengthened. It also has to be creative in facing pandemics, but also inclusion, because the growing inequalities that we are seeing in many countries have to be very seriously taken. And then we have the digital divide. 3.6 billion people globally have no access to the internet. How can these kids, for example, be part of this digital transformation if they don't have any access? And here, I think that what President Xi Jinping also signaled in Davos 2017, that China, as the most populous nation of the world, second largest economy in the world, is willing to work with other nations through the multilateral organizations, is something so important.
We understand that the Chinese President Xi Jinping is once again going to deliver a speech at this year's Agenda Summit later next week. Tell us more about what the world would like to know more about China, about what China is thinking, what China's plan is, and how is China looking at the future.
Well, thank you so much. First and foremost, we are, of course, very honored that President Xi Jinping comes to the Davos Agenda meeting next week. He will be the first speaker giving a special message on our opening day. And I think a lot of our business participants and also other governments are really looking for signals on how China is going to show leadership also in the post-COVID world, how China is going to handle a re-entry into the Paris Agreement from the U.S., and also to learn more about also the economic recovery of China. China, in fact, were one of the few economies growing last year, so the rest of the economies have been contracting. So China's leadership now on the Sustainable Development Goals, on climate, but also on the new technologies, also how to address the digital divide, and also how much of a role China will take globally in getting the trade negotiations back also in WTO. I think the world is waiting for, and also to hear really how the president wants to lead China in the years to come.
A lot of questions certainly out there, but also it reminds us of the fact that it was at the World Economic Forum, in fact, Mr. Brende, in 2017, that then Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, and then, of course, who is also now the Chinese President, Xi Jinping, they were both participating at that specific meeting. Many wonder how much a World Economic Forum will play as a platform for different views to be exchanged and also for the real cooperation to be done.
So we strongly believe that the global challenges that we are faced with, being pandemic, being climate change, but also more inclusive growth, digital divide, can only be solved if nations are collaborating. And I do hope that with the new leadership in the U.S., with President Joe Biden, but also with the Chinese leadership, there will be a new path for finding common solutions. Of course, there will always be discussions between two big countries like China and the U.S. There also will be competition, but we will need to see also a willingness to find solutions, and if we are going to make really progress on also fighting global poverty, having a more inclusive world, we need G2 to work together. And our platform at the World Economic Forum is always open. So we will have our physical annual meeting in Singapore in May, and there we hope that the U.S. leadership and the Chinese leadership can come together and start also a dialogue on a good path forward.
Mr. Brende, if you look at the world over the past few years, it's not just about the issues and challenges of leadership, but also some of the major divide we are seeing, as you just mentioned. And we see, even though with a change of leadership in certain countries, those problems have not been solved. So how pragmatic shall we be about what we can achieve over the next, to this year, first of all, and the next few years, Mr. Brende?
No, it's a good question. I think we need to get growth back. China has growth, so then that part is solved for China. But of course, China is also very much relying on growth in other countries because we do trade with each other. So we have done a lot now to create that growth by unparalleled stimulus, $12 trillion in stimulus. But many countries are still in a situation where they're really, really struggling. And they were struggling when it comes to inequalities also before the pandemic. What we are concerned about at the World Economic Forum is that the questions of inequalities not well trickling down also to everyone, that's a challenge that are even bigger with increased unemployment in many countries, and the legitimacy of the market economy, the legitimacy of our systems are based on a contract that everyone have to gain from it. If you work hard, if you contribute to society, you should also have a decent salary. These are things that I think we need to address, making sure that inequalities are not growing, that they are closing, and that all the young people of the world do have more equal opportunities to succeed.
Mr. Brende, we know World Economic Forum is a platform that brings in a lot of stakeholders, including from the business community. Now, business community have to save themselves over the past few years, particularly during the year of the pandemic. But now, with the momentum of politics changing in the world, what do you think are the qualities of political leadership they need to demonstrate in this year and hopefully in the next few years?
So business leaders, I think, have been very responsible in this crisis. And
Yes.
We have, for example, last year, launched the ESGs, these environmental, social governance standards that companies have committed to. So in many ways, companies have gone further than governments now, saying that they want to go climate neutral in 2030 or 2050. And as you know, the World Economic Forum is the international organization for public-private cooperation. And I think with all the stimulus that is out there, the fiscal muscles of many governments is limited in the years to come. So we also have to mobilize the private sector to support the digital transformation and the Green Deal. So we do hope that the 1,000 companies leading of the world that are part of the World Economic Forum will also see that they have a huge responsibility in transforming the world and the growth into something more sustainable, job creating, and also working for less inequality.
On the other hand, you also see in the trade sector, there seems to be a lot of consensus. For example, RCEP, China, ASEAN countries plus Japan, South Korea at the late last year. Meanwhile, China-EU investment initiative seems to also on its way there after China's agreed the latest on the labor standards. So, Mr. Brende, looking at the future, the trade, do we have enough momentum from your perspective?
So trade is the engine of growth. That has been the engine for the last 2 decades, and or 3 decades. What we have a tendency of forgetting is that in those 3 decades, we have seen poverty eradication that we haven't seen any time before in our history. So I'm glad that trade is now back on the agenda. I am very happy about the trade agreements between the Asian countries, but also between China and the EU. But if we're going to get back growth, we also need to get back trade. And countries trading with each other. You know, this beggar thy neighbor attitude should stop. It is really about prosper your neighbor. So if others do well, you will do well. And if you do well, others will do well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brende, for talking to us on CGTN.
No, thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope to see you in person very soon.
My earlier conversation with Borge Brende, President of the World Economic Forum. You're watching World Insight. Coming up in the program, the way forward for China and the U.S., a departure from the past 4 years, or more of the same? Sharp insights from the President of the National Committee on U.S China Relations from New York. Up next.
I think a lot that the Biden folks will reverse a lot of the policies which have damaged U.S China relations.
Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Well, the new U.S. administration carried out a raft of policy changes on its first day. Its position on China remains unclear, even though we have been hearing words from the members of the current administration. It takes two to tango, as they say. There's hope both countries could help each other navigate choppy waters. So looking ahead, how could U.S.-China relations shift under the Biden administration? Would the new U.S. president take on a different posture toward China? Answers to these questions will not only have critical consequences and impact on the two countries, but also for the broader international community. On that, I talked to Stephen Orleans, President of National Committee on U.S. China Relations, who had work experience on China for nearly 40 years. Here's the talk. Stephen Orleans, President of the National Committee on U.S. China Relations. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us right now.
Great to see you again.
Good to see you, Steve. How you been doing in New York?
Well, it's, you know, compared to many people, I'm doing extremely well. We've been able to kind of transform the National Committee from an in-person organization to a virtual organization. So we do many public programs, which get huge distribution now. It's not as good as CGTNs, but it's pretty, we get thousands of people on our programs. We distribute our videos now to over 1 million people. So actually, we have been good, but obviously it's terribly sad that even today, over 4,000 Americans died of COVID-19. So the epidemic is still raging here.
Will we be able to, China and the United States, I mean, to work on COVID-19 in a cooperative way, from your perspective?
I certainly hope so. You know, President Biden, one of the very first things he did was rejoin the WHO, and tomorrow, Dr. Fauci is going to be the American representative at a virtual meeting of the WHO. So we're going to certainly participate in the WHO. China, of course, has continued its participation in the WHO. In fact, has a delegation of WHO scientists in China now working with the Chinese. I hope we find lots of ways to cooperate, not only to deal with the pandemic as it exists today, but to deal with future pandemics. That the great tragedy of this pandemic, as I've said on your show in prior years, I believe that a pandemic would draw the United States and China closer together.
Mr. Orleans, one of the ways we could move forward is to be able to reflect back as to what really happened and how can we learn both from the lessons and experiences, shall I put it that way. What do you think happened over the past 4 years between China and the United States on the U.S.-China relations, particularly from Washington's policy?
Well, from the Washington point of view, you know, as I've said, you know, the problem in U.S.-China relations was not only President Trump. that if it were only President Trump, he would leave and then the relationship would be fine again. But it's not. It's much deeper. It's in the Congress. It's in the think tank world. It's in the media. It's in the American people.
How much misinformation, first of all, is there about China? It's hardly to be quantified, but certainly people point that as a big problem now. How can we correct that?
So the vicious cycle should become a virtuous cycle. President Trump is gone, but there are still lots of people who think his policies were good for the United States. I think they weren't. I disagree with an overwhelming percentage of the policies that he implemented with respect to China. But it's important that the Chinese government help change the atmosphere of the U.S. China relationship by doing things during this period that the Biden administration is deciding what its China policy is going to be.
It has a lot to do with how the one sees the other, and therefore either extending the olive branch or being continuously cautious with one another. One of the things I really want to ask for your opinion, given your insights into the politics and also the China policy circle in the U.S., Mr. Orleans, is what is going to be the orientation, do you think, reading the signs, of the Biden administration's approach to China? Is it going to be about ideology? Is it going to emphasize on the differences of political system? Is it going to be finger pointing? Or is it going to be much more proactive engagement of a different sort with China?
Number one, it's going to depend upon what the Chinese government does. That the expertise in the Biden administration, from Tony Blinken to Jake Sullivan to Kurt Campbell to Laura Rosenberger to the people below them, is really terrific. We now have terrific China experts in the United States who are not ideological. They are not ideological. It is not the Peter Navarros and the others who just, no matter what China does, it was interpreted negatively. These are people who really understand. I think a lot that the Biden folks will reverse a lot of the policies which have damaged U.S. China relations. Especially, obviously, they already have with respect to climate. We will see climate cooperation end up very high on the list of things we talk about with China. I would expect to see improvements in visa policy, that the Trump administration's restrictions on students, restrictions on businesses, restrictions on Chinese who are in the United States and want to remain in the United States, I would expect the Biden administration to, after some period of time, to reverse it, which will create, again, that creates a positive tone. I'll expect the Biden administration to move towards discussing with the Chinese reopening of the consulates in Houston and in Chengdu. That those kinds of policies hurt America and they hurt China. And the benefit of them was extremely limited. So I'm expecting progress on a lot of issues, but a lot of it, again, I keep coming back to the same point, is what is the Chinese government going to do? The question is, how do you create this virtuous cycle instead of this vicious cycle? So it's the creation of a virtuous cycle where China does a good thing, America does a good thing, China does another good thing, and you start kind of peeling away the differences.
Dialogues mechanisms between the two countries at the government level, at the so-called second track, at the academic level has been hugely harmed over the past 4 years. Some have collapsed, others have been put onto the side. So how efficient do you think the Biden administration will be having the political tools and the momentum to restart, reestablish, and refresh all of these possibilities?
By the way, during this 4-year nightmare, our track 2 dialogues, our unofficial dialogues have not only continued, they've increased. So we now have 7, the National Committee on U.S. China Relations has 7 track 2 dialogues with Chinese counterparts on issues ranging from digital economy to strategic issues, to energy, to healthcare, to human rights, rule of law. So that has continued, and I expect it will continue during the Biden administration. I don't think the Biden administration will go back to having the number of dialogues that had existed in 2016 before Trump came into office. I think they will establish dialogues with the Chinese in a limited number of areas. Again, there was frustration on the part of the U.S. government that these dialogues often were just talk and never yielded concrete results. So media will be unhappy maybe because you won't get up in the morning and see that the president has made a tweet which has upset China.
Tariff is a very obvious target. Now, it didn't benefit the United States in terms of trade with China or overall trade globally, but it does harm China and U.S. interests as well. So, Mr. Audience, how fast do you expect the Biden administration be able to correct that course?
Well, when you say correct the course, there are certain aspects of the Trump policy which the Biden administration will continue to follow, and there's certain which will be thrown out. I mean, ultimately, tariffs are bad for China, bad for America, bad for the American people, bad for the Chinese people. It's effectively a tax on the American consumer. So I would expect that early in the Biden administration, we will see discussions with the Chinese on how to reduce those tariffs. That it won't be done unilaterally by the United States, it won't be done unilaterally by China, but together we can begin to lower these tariffs, which benefits the Chinese people, benefits the American people. It especially benefits the working families of the United States. I've been fortunate in life. If my bills go up $800 a year, it doesn't have a material impact on my life. If you're a working family and your income is $25,000 a year and your bills go up $800 a year, that's a material effect on your life, and you need to decide, do you not buy the shoes, do you not buy the pants, do you not buy the school books for the kids? It's not a good thing. So I think the Biden administration recognizes that, and I expect that they will enter into discussions with the Chinese government on how to reduce these tariffs because they're bad. But China needs to move ahead it's doing a good job now in financial services. We're beginning to see real openings in financial services, and that should move ahead faster.
How much will the Biden administration be able to tend the garden of diplomacy, given two things? One, the U.S. baggage of the past few years, and also the recent mob and insurrection happening in the Capitol. The rest of the world also have a taste of what America is like today. Secondly, it also has a lot to do with how much attention span and energy the new administration has toward, building international relations, including that with China, which is one of the most strategic bilateral relations, as there are so many things to do within the country, including COVID-19.
They are, of course, going to be focused first on COVID-19. 4,000 plus deaths today, hundreds of thousands of more illnesses. Second, they're going to have to focus on the economy. But both of those issues, Kenway, give China the opportunity to help and set a positive tone. They're experts in China who can help the Biden administration dealing with COVID-19. And they should do that. They should reach out to the extent that it is helpful. But just think, if China cut tariffs immediately on some American goods without waiting for the United States to do it, that would help Americans in a way that would set a positive tone for U.S. China relations.
But you are not answering my question. My question really is how much energy the new administration really could have for international issues? I mean, just realistically
think,
speaking, and also how much they will be able to change the nature of U.S. China relations at the very beginning of their term, for example, for the next 6 months, given the fact that their predecessor, before they leave their office, they set a lot of traps regarding what the new administration could do about China.
I have enormous confidence in the people that President Biden has appointed to run our China policy. They will be perfectly capable of making whatever changes they deem necessary, while others in the administration work on COVID-19, work on the economy. This is a team. He has put together a team. We joke, it's a reunion. What they want to accomplish. Can they deal with these issues and have initiatives on international relations? Absolutely, they can. The question is, which of those Trump policies do they want to reverse? And in my view, as you correctly point out, since November 3rd, since Trump lost the election by over 7 million votes, his administration, the White House put out a number of executive orders, the State Department and Treasury put out other administrative orders. In my view, 100% of them should be reversed. They should all be reversed, and then the Biden administration should consider one by one which, if any of these, make sense.
If you were asked, Mr. Orleans, about a list, priorities to deal with by members of the Biden administration, many of whom, in fact, over the decades you have been working quite closely with, what kind of list would you provide?
Changing the visa policies is absolutely, that has to be a priority.
Yeah.
I will suggest, and I have suggested, that Chinese who've been denied visas or other, these restrictions on visas are damaging for no good. There is no benefit that accrues to China or the United States. So I think the tariff reduction discussions need to occur immediately. I think it's important for American exports to China, and I think it's important for the American consumer to begin to benefit from those lower prices. So that is, in effect, a tax cut. I think we need to immediately enter into discussions on the terms under which we each can open the respective consulates that have been closed. I think we need, as you've made reference to already, we need more cooperation on public health issues. We need to work together, not only to deal with this pandemic, but to deal with future pandemics. And I think the Biden administration will make that a priority. I think very easy to do is invite back CGTN and other Chinese media outlets back to the United States. We've restricted some of the visas for them. I think China should not only invite back expelled American journalists, but add to the number of American journalists who are in China. I think we need to enter into discussions to solve the Huawei issue. I think that is a extremely complicated, difficult discussion,
right,
but it really should be able to be resolved. I can't say we, but I certainly want each government to take actions which creates a positive atmosphere, which can then lead to policies which benefit the people of America and the people of China.
I really wondered, Mr. Orleans, how much the U.S. needs to repair itself in order to get all these important tasks that you mentioned done.
Maybe I'm overly optimistic because of the joy I experienced yesterday at 12 at noon, but it really is morning in America. We have put experts back in charge. We have put science back in charge. We're not going to debate the science of climate change anymore. We're going to debate what we need to do. So I am incredibly optimistic today.
Yeah.
When I look at the things that President Biden is doing, when I look at the rollout of his pandemic policies, it just makes my heart soar. I would close with my favorite movie, which was called Little Big Man, a Dustin Hoffman movie of almost 45 years ago. And the Indian chief used to greet Dustin Hoffman and said, "When I see you, my heart soars like a hawk. What I saw yesterday, my heart soared like a hawk."
Steve Ordens, President of the National Committee on U.S. China Relations, an optimistic patriot, as we have just discovered. Thank you so much, Steve. All the best and be safe. That's my conversation with Stephen Ordens, President of the National Committee on U.S. China Relations. As he indicated in the conversation, tariff issue is going to be a big one between China and the United States. Will the new administration having both the courage and the political skills to handle it well? I asked that question also to the president of U.S. China Business Council, Craig Allen. Let's listen to what he had to say. Congratulations that you have a new administration, a new president coming into the office, but the question about China-U.S. trade relations remains. How much prospect do you see in that relationship for the next 4 years?
Well, the last 4 years have been very difficult and interesting, and U.S. exports have fallen dramatically over the last 2 years in particular. So we're coming off of a difficult period. I think that the next 4 years will be more predictable and more stable, with less government and political risk. That said, no doubt there will be many unexpected challenges as the two governments try to reach a new equilibrium. I think that that's quite a large challenge, and we'll have to see how that develops. But I do expect the Chinese economy to do well and American companies to remain interested in exporting and investing in China.
A lot of the misinformation about China-U.S. trade relations have been spreading over the past few years. And in fact, a lot of facts have been ignored. How much do you think the course will be corrected, at least in that regard?
Well, I think that the basic economic facts are well known. I think it's also true that the interpretation of the facts by the Trump administration did not always follow normal economic logic. One example of that would be the tariffs. Tariffs are not a good way to address trade problems or to reduce a trade deficit. So I think that a relook at the economic fundamentals underlying the relationship is well overdue, is very welcome, and will be helpful as we move forward. Now, that's not to say that there will be no problems. I fully expect different problems, but hopefully tariffs and continual confrontation will not be the approach that both governments use against each other. Rather, we should explore opportunities for collaboration and coordination as appropriate.
Mr. Allen, what do you think the business community that you are representing here in the U.S., the U.S. China Business Council, are looking in for the policies of this new administration? If they ask you, what advice or suggestion would you provide to them when they're coming into the office anew? What did you say to them?
Well, the U.S.-China relationship is big and important. China is our largest overseas market. Canada and Mexico are a little larger, but they're not overseas, and we need to get our policies right. The second thing that we need to address is that American companies don't appreciate the tariffs. By and large, both the import tariffs as well as the counter tariffs put on by the Chinese government have had negative effects for American companies. And therefore, we wish to see a lifting of the tariffs in the near term. But in return for the lifting of the tariffs, what we would like to see is greater market access in China, greater market liberalization. We do believe that opening of the Chinese domestic market to foreign competition would be good for China, would supplement and expand Chinese economic growth. And so we're hopeful that there will be additional agreements between the two governments and a rapid lifting of tariffs. But those should go together and as soon as possible.
Craig Allen, President of U.S. China Business Council. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching and bye for now.